My name is Vivian Cooper. I am 68 years old, and I never plan to become famous, rich, or part of any headline. I plan to live quietly, grow old gently, and maybe spend my days reading books and tending flowers. But life had other plans. 11 years ago, my daughter left her 5-year-old autistic son at my doorstep and never came back. That boy's name is Ethan. Doctors said he would never succeed. Teachers said he was too difficult. People whispered that I was wasting my remaining years on a lost cause. They were wrong. All of them. By the time Ethan turned 16, he had built a software company worth $3.2 million. When the news finally told our story, people called it a miracle. They never saw the fear, the nights without sleep, or the quiet strength of a child everyone had already given up on. And 2 weeks after that story aired, my doorbell rang. On the other side stood my daughter Rachel, holding legal documents and a lawyer, claiming she had been part of Ethan's life all along. That was the moment everything I had fought for was about to be taken away. But before I tell you how that ended, you need to understand how it all began. Rachel came to my house on a cold Friday afternoon in November 2010. The sky was gray, the air heavy, the kind of day that already feels unfinished. She stood at my front door with Ethan beside her and one small backpack hanging from her shoulder. "Just for the weekend, Mom," she said quickly, not meeting my eyes. "I need a break. Please." Ethan stood silently at her side, 5 years old, staring at the wooden porch beneath his shoes. His body rocked gently back and forth, heel to toe, as if he were trying to soothe himself. His hands were pressed over his ears, even though there was no loud sound around us. Rachel kept talking, her words tumbling out fast. "I'll call you Sunday." Before I could respond, she turned around and walked toward her car. She didn't hug Ethan. She didn't kneel down to say goodbye. She didn't even look back. I watched her taillights disappear down the street while Ethan continued rocking beside me, as if nothing had changed, as if his world hadn't just cracked open. I had been an elementary school teacher for 35 years. I had taught hundreds of children. A few autistic students had passed through my classroom over the decades, always with assistants, specialists, carefully written plans. I had followed instructions. I had nodded wisely. But standing there with my grandson on that porch, I realized I knew almost nothing about what it meant to actually live with autism every day. "Hey, Ethan," I said softly, trying not to startle him. "Do you want to come inside?" He didn't look up. He didn't answer. He just rocked. I picked up his backpack. It was lighter than it should have been, too light for even a weekend stay. I opened the door wider and waited. After a long minute, Ethan walked past me into the house, his hands still pressed tightly against his ears. Inside, the refrigerator hummed. Ethan flinched. The heater clicked on. He pressed his palms harder against his head. I closed the door as quietly as I could. He moved straight into the living room and crouched down in the corner near the bookshelf, knees pulled to his chest. "Are you hungry?" I asked gently. "Nothing," he whispered. "Are you thirsty?" He rocked faster instead of answering. I went to the kitchen and poured water into a yellow plastic cup I kept from his previous visits. Those visits had been rare, maybe twice a year, and never for long. I placed the cup on the floor a short distance from him. He paused, looked at it, then returned to rocking, as if even reaching for it took too much effort. That first night was chaos. I cooked chicken nuggets and fries because Rachel had once mentioned that was what he ate. Ethan took one look at the plate and turned his head away. I tried pasta, then a sandwich. He pushed each one aside without a word. "What do you want to eat?" I asked, feeling helpless. He hummed softly, a low sound deep in his throat, and stared at the wall. In the end, he ate 3 crackers. That was all. Bedtime was worse. When I tried to help him brush his teeth, he screamed. Not cried, screamed, like I was hurting him. I stepped back immediately and the screaming stopped, but his body shook. Okay, I said, my heart racing. "You can skip it tonight." I put him in the guest room and tried to tuck the blanket around him the way I had done for my own children years ago. He threw it off. I tried again. He screamed again. I placed the blanket at the foot of the bed and quietly backed out of the room. He didn't sleep. All night long, I heard him humming that same low sound through the thin walls. I didn't sleep either. Saturday morning, I called Rachel. No answer. I left a message asking what Ethan ate, what his routines were, what helped him. She didn't call back. I tried again that night, then Sunday morning, then Sunday night. Silence. 1 week passed, then 2. That was when I finally understood. She wasn't coming back. By the 3rd week, the truth had settled into my bones. Rachel was gone, and Ethan was mine. Not legally, not officially, but in every way that mattered. I took him to a pediatrician because I didn't know what else to do. The doctor listened carefully as I explained everything, from the rocking to the humming to the way sounds made him panic. After the examination, she leaned back in her chair and spoke gently. "Ethan is autistic, Mrs. Cooper. Has he ever been formally evaluated?" I shook my head. His mother was supposed to handle that. The doctor nodded slowly, her eyes kind but firm. "Then you're handling it now." That sentence changed my life. I enrolled Ethan in speech therapy, occupational therapy, and behavioral therapy. I learned words I had never needed before: sensory overload, routine dependency, meltdown triggers. I learned that Ethan needed the same breakfast every single day: scrambled eggs and toast, cut corner to corner, never straight across. Nothing on the plate could touch anything else. I learned that if I took a different route to therapy, even by accident, he would scream in the back seat until his voice broke. I learned not to touch him unless he touched me first. I learned to watch more than I acted, to wait instead of forcing. Slowly, painfully slowly, we began to understand each other. One morning, about 2 weeks after Ethan arrived, I woke before sunrise and found him sitting on the living room floor. I had bought him a bin of small toy cars, hoping they might distract him. He was lining them up in a perfect row, but it wasn't random. At first, I thought it was just a child's game. Then I realized what he was doing. The cars were arranged by color, but not just red, blue, green. They were arranged by shade. A deep red, then a slightly lighter red, then orange-red, then orange, then yellow-orange, then yellow, each shift so subtle it was almost invisible. He had created a flawless gradient. I sat on the couch and watched quietly, afraid to interrupt him. "That's amazing, Ethan," I said softly. He didn't look at me, but his hands kept moving with precision, as if the world made sense to him in ways I could barely see. December arrived, cold and silent. Rachel still hadn't called. I stopped trying to make Ethan act like other children. I stopped asking him to look at me when I spoke. I stopped pushing words out of him. Instead, I made the world predictable. Every day followed the same rhythm. Breakfast at the same time, the same television show afterward, the same walk, the same street, the same sidewalk cracks. Bedtime always ended with me standing in the doorway and saying goodnight, never touching him. The consistency calmed him. He wasn't joyful, but he wasn't frantic anymore. He sat beside me while I read, not touching, just existing together. He began eating full meals without pushing the plate away. On Christmas Eve, I baked sugar cookies. Ethan didn't help, but he sat at the table and watched as I pressed the dough flat and cut out shapes. The kitchen smelled warm, like vanilla and butter, like something safe. The phone rang, and my heart leaped. I wiped my hands and answered quickly. Rachel's voice came through the line, flat and tired. "Mom." I nearly cried with relief. "When are you coming to get him?" I asked. "He needs you." I paused, listening. "I can't do this anymore, Mom," she said quietly. "I tried. I really tried. But I can't." Her voice cracked for a moment, then hardened again. "He's yours." The line went dead. I stood there holding the phone as the cookies burned in the oven. Smoke curled upward. I turned the oven off, pulled the tray out, and stared at the blackened shapes. Then I slid down onto the kitchen floor and sat there, my back against the cabinet, feeling older than I had ever felt before. Ethan appeared in the doorway. He watched me silently. After a long moment, he walked to the counter, picked up the yellow plastic cup, and placed it beside me on the floor. Then he walked away. I cried harder than I ever had in my life, but for the first time, I wasn't crying alone. The years that followed blended together. I became very good at sameness. Same breakfast every morning, same route to school, same clothes texture he could tolerate, same chair at the table. When I stayed consistent, Ethan stayed regulated. When something changed unexpectedly, the world fell apart. I learned to plan everything. When he turned 6, he became obsessed with magnetic letters. He would stand at the refrigerator for hours arranging them, not into words, but into patterns, lines, clusters, sequences that meant nothing to me but everything to him. Soon, he began drawing symbols in small notebooks, circles, lines, ticks, marks filling page after page. I asked his therapist, Dr. Lin, if I should be worried. She smiled. "He's mapping his world," she said. "It helps him feel safe. Let him do it." So I did. Notebook after notebook filled with symbols. By 7, those symbols became letters. By 8, words. Simple ones at first. Egg, toast, home, school. Then sentences. Times, dates, what he ate, where we went. His handwriting was neat, precise, careful, like everything he did. He began making brief eye contact, just a flicker, then looking away. He tolerated the grocery store if we went at the same time every week. He learned, slowly, that I wasn't going to leave. One spring morning when Ethan was 8, I was making breakfast when he spoke without warning. "Why did Mom leave?" I froze. He wasn't looking at me, just writing in his notebook. I sat across from him and told him the truth as gently as I could. She couldn't handle it. He nodded once, wrote something down, and went back to his eggs. I cried later where he couldn't hear me. But he had spoken. He had trusted me with the hardest question of all. A year after Ethan began speaking regularly, the school called me in for a meeting. It was September 2014, and Ethan was 9 years old, starting 4th grade. By then, I believed we had passed the worst of it. He spoke in full sentences, read above grade level, and did his math faster than most children his age. He still struggled socially, but he was calmer, more focused. I allowed myself to feel hopeful. Then Principal Andrews asked to see me. "Mrs. Cooper," he said on the phone, his voice formal. "We need to discuss Ethan's placement." Something in his tone made my stomach tighten. At the meeting, he sat behind his desk with Mrs. Brennan, Ethan's new teacher, beside him. She had seemed kind during orientation. The problem, they explained, wasn't academic. Ethan completed all his work. He followed instructions. The problem was that he didn't participate in group activities. He didn't make eye contact during circle time. He covered his ears during music class because the noise overwhelmed him. "Mrs. Cooper," Principal Andrews said, "we believe Ethan would be better served in our special education classroom. It would be less stressful for everyone. For everyone, not for Ethan." I requested an IEP meeting and spent days preparing. I gathered therapy reports, progress notes, test scores, writing samples. His reading level was 2 years ahead. His math was even further. His handwriting was careful and exact. The problem wasn't learning. The problem was that he learned differently. The meeting took place on a Friday afternoon in a small conference room lit by humming fluorescent lights. Around the table sat administrators, a school psychologist, the special education coordinator, and me. I listened as they spoke about Ethan as if he weren't a child, but a problem to be managed. When it was my turn, I spoke calmly. "Ethan is autistic, yes, but he is capable. He deserves support, not isolation." Silence followed. Eventually, they agreed to keep him in mainstream classes with accommodations. I walked out exhausted but victorious. At home, Ethan sensed the tension, even though I said nothing. That evening, he sat beside me and placed one of his notebooks on the table between us. Inside, he had written, "Did I do bad at school?" My heart broke. "No," I said. "You did very well." He nodded, satisfied with the answer, and returned to his writing. As Ethan grew older, his fascination with patterns deepened. At 10, he began spending time on the old desktop computer I had kept in the spare room. At first, he only watched educational videos. Then he began typing strings of numbers and letters into simple programs he found online. I didn't understand what he was doing, but I didn't interfere. One afternoon, I found him sitting perfectly still, staring at the screen. "What are you making?" I asked. "A system," he replied. "For what?" "Everything," he said simply. By middle school, Ethan could code better than some adults. He saw logic where others saw chaos. He could find errors instantly, patterns hidden deep inside complex systems. Teachers noticed. Some encouraged him. Others were unsettled by how different he was. Socially, he remained distant. He didn't attend birthday parties. He didn't join clubs. But he wasn't lonely. He had his routines, his work, his quiet confidence. When Ethan was 13, Rachel sent a message. Not a call, not an apology. A message asking how he was doing. I stared at the screen for a long time before responding. "He's well," I wrote. That was all. She didn't reply. At 14, Ethan created a small software tool to help manage repetitive scheduling tasks. He designed it because he needed it for himself. I used it too. Then his therapist used it. Then a teacher asked for a copy. Ethan didn't understand why people wanted something he had made so easily. "It works," he said. "That's enough." But others saw value, real value. By 16, that simple tool had grown into a full platform. Investors noticed. Reporters noticed. I watched my quiet grandson sit across from adults in suits, answering questions with calm precision. He didn't smile for cameras. He didn't perform. He just spoke the truth. When the news story aired, people called him a genius. They called me an inspiration. They didn't know how close we had come to losing him in a system that never tried to understand him. 2 weeks after the story aired, the doorbell rang. I opened the door and saw Rachel standing there, older but unmistakable, with a lawyer beside her. She smiled like we were family again. "We need to talk," she said. Inside, she laid documents on the table. Custody papers, financial records, visit logs, all claiming she had been involved in Ethan's life all along. Our lawyer reviewed them and frowned. "Without proof, they're forged," he said quietly. "We might lose." I felt the room spin. 11 years of work, of sacrifice, about to be erased by lies printed neatly on paper. I looked at Ethan, expecting fear. He leaned toward me and whispered, "Let her talk." I didn't understand then, but I trusted him. He had always seen patterns long before anyone else. Rachel spoke for a long time. She talked about sacrifice, about how hard motherhood had been, about how she had always loved Ethan even when it hurt too much to be near him. Her lawyer nodded at the right moments, sliding documents across the table as if paper could replace years of absence. I sat quietly, my hands folded in my lap, my heart pounding so loudly I was sure everyone could hear it. Every sentence felt like another piece of our life being rewritten without our consent. Our lawyer finally interrupted. "Mrs. Cooper raised Ethan for over a decade," he said carefully. "There is no documented contact for 11 years. Rachel's lawyer smiled politely. "That's what these records clarify," he said. "Visits that weren't officially registered, financial support given in cash, emotional involvement that doesn't always leave a digital trail." He turned toward Ethan. "Your mother never stopped caring, did she?" Ethan looked at Rachel for the first time since she entered the room. His face was calm, unreadable. She smiled at him, hopeful. He didn't smile back. He didn't speak. He simply watched her, the same way he had always watched the world, carefully, silently, collecting details. The meeting ended with nothing resolved. The lawyers agreed to reconvene after reviewing everything. Rachel stood up and hesitated near the door. "I tried, Mom," she said softly, as if that might change history. Then she left. I closed the door behind her and leaned against it, my legs shaking. I felt like I was about to lose Ethan all over again. That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay awake listening to the familiar sounds of the house, the refrigerator hum, the distant ticking of the clock. Around midnight, I heard footsteps. Ethan stood in the doorway of my room. He rarely came in without warning. "Are you afraid?" he asked. I sat up slowly. "Yes," I said. He nodded, as if he had expected that answer. Then he said something I will never forget. Patterns always leave traces. The next morning, Ethan asked for my laptop. He opened it and began typing, his fingers moving with quiet confidence. He asked me questions in between lines of code. Dates, addresses, names of therapists, teachers, doctors. I answered everything. I didn't understand what he was building, but I trusted him. I had learned long ago that when Ethan was quiet and focused, something important was happening. For 3 days, he worked without stopping. He barely ate, barely slept. On the 4th day, he called our lawyer. "I have evidence," he said calmly. "Digital evidence. Rachel's records contradict themselves." He showed us timelines, metadata, location histories embedded in files Rachel didn't even know existed, dates that placed her in other cities during the times she claimed to be visiting, financial documents created years later but labeled as old, visit logs copied from templates found online. It was all there, mapped clearly, undeniably. Our lawyer stared at the screen in disbelief. "This is extraordinary," he said. Ethan nodded. She assumed no one would check the pattern. Rachel had underestimated the very thing that made Ethan different, his ability to see what others missed. When the second meeting came, Rachel walked in confident. By the time Ethan finished speaking, that confidence was gone. He didn't accuse, he didn't raise his voice, he simply presented the truth. Rachel tried to interrupt. The judge raised a hand. "Sit down, please." By the end of the session, the case was dismissed. Rachel's claims were declared fraudulent. She left without looking at us. Outside the courthouse, reporters waited. Cameras flashed. They wanted a quote. I stepped back. Ethan stepped forward. "Autism is not a weakness," he said. "It is a different way of thinking. Sometimes it sees the truth faster." That night, we sat at the kitchen table eating eggs and toast, just like always. The yellow cup sat between us. Nothing had changed, and everything had. Ethan looked at me and said, "Thank you for not leaving." I reached across the table, and for the first time in 11 years, he let me take his hand. I am 68 years old. I raised a child the world gave up on, and I learned something in return. Our best chapters don't come when life is easy. They come when we choose to stay. After the case was dismissed, life didn't suddenly become easy. People assume victory brings peace, but for us, it brought noise. Interviews, emails, invitations, requests from people who claimed they had always believed in Ethan. I protected him as best I could. I said no more often than yes. Ethan tolerated the attention, but I could see how exhausting it was for him. Too many voices, too many unpredictable moments. Fame was chaos, and chaos had never been his friend. We made one rule. No matter what happened outside our house, inside would stay the same. Breakfast was still eggs and toast, cut corner to corner. The yellow cup stayed on the table. We walked the same route every evening. The world could celebrate him, but home would remain quiet and safe. That was the only way he could breathe. Rachel didn't disappear after that. She sent emails through her lawyer, asking for mediation, for contact, for reconciliation. I read them once, then stopped. Ethan read one message and handed the laptop back to me. "She wants access, not connection," he said. I knew he was right. He had always understood people more clearly than they understood him. Ethan's company continued to grow. Investors tried to pressure him into moving fast, scaling faster, becoming louder. He refused. "Growth without structure causes failure," he told them. Some walked away, others listened. Those who listened stayed. He hired carefully, choosing people who respected systems, boundaries, and quiet work. His office was calm, organized, predictable. People said it was the most peaceful place they had ever worked. Sometimes, late at night, I watched him from the doorway as he worked. He sat perfectly still, eyes focused, fingers moving with certainty. I thought about the little boy crouched by my bookshelf years ago, hands over his ears, terrified of sound. I wondered how anyone could have looked at that child and seen nothing worth saving. When Ethan turned 17, he spoke at a small conference. He didn't prepare a speech, he answered questions. Someone asked what success meant to him. He thought for a long moment before responding. "Success is when your environment stops hurting you," he said. "When you can think clearly." The room fell silent. Not everyone was kind. Online comments appeared. Some accused me of exploiting him. Others claimed autism was being used as a story to sell inspiration. Ethan read the comments once, then closed the page. "Patterns repeat," he said. "Ignorance is one of them." One evening, as we were washing dishes together in silence, he asked me a question I hadn't expected. "Did you ever want your life back?" I dried my hands slowly before answering. "Sometimes I missed rest," I said. "Sometimes I was afraid. But I never wanted a different life." He nodded, satisfied, and went back to rinsing his plate. Rachel showed up one final time, months later, without a lawyer. I didn't open the door. I watched her through the window as she stood there, uncertain, smaller than I remembered. After a while, she left. Ethan didn't ask about it. He didn't need to. As his 18th birthday approached, people asked what I would do next. Travel, they suggested. Rest. Enjoy the money. I smiled politely. I had already enjoyed the greatest reward I would ever know. I had watched a child become himself in a world that told him he never could. On the morning of his birthday, Ethan handed me a small wrapped box. Inside was a simple bracelet engraved with one word: stay. I laughed and cried at the same time. "I'm not going anywhere," I said. That night, after cake and quiet celebration, Ethan sat beside me on the couch. He leaned his head lightly against my shoulder, something he had never done before. I didn't move. I didn't speak. I just stayed. Some people believe success is loud, that it comes with applause and headlines. But the real success, the kind that lasts, is quiet. It sounds like a humming refrigerator in the night. It looks like eggs and toast every morning. It feels like a child finally trusting that someone will stay. As Ethan entered adulthood, I noticed changes that were quiet but powerful. He began to ask questions not just about systems and patterns, but about people. Why do they lie when truth is easier? Why do they fear silence? I didn't always have answers. Sometimes I told him the truth. People are afraid of what they don't understand. He accepted that explanation, but I could tell he was still studying the question, turning it over in his mind like one of his puzzles. Ethan moved into a small apartment not far from the house, but he didn't take anything with him except his books, his laptop, and the yellow cup. He visited every morning for breakfast, same eggs, same toast, same chair. Independence didn't mean separation for him. It meant expanding his system carefully without breaking it. I stayed involved with his company only as a quiet presence. I organized papers, answered emails when he felt overwhelmed, reminded him to eat. Some people called me his manager. I corrected them. "I'm his anchor," I said. "Anchors don't lead, they hold." One afternoon, a young mother came to our door with her autistic daughter. She had seen Ethan's interview and was desperate for hope. Ethan sat with the child on the floor, lining up colored pencils by shade, just like he once had with toy cars. The girl smiled for the first time that day. The mother cried. I watched and understood something new. Ethan's success wasn't just financial. It was a map for others who were still lost. Rachel faded into memory. I stopped feeling anger. Anger requires energy, and I had learned to use mine carefully. Forgiveness didn't mean forgetting. It meant releasing myself from the weight of what could not be changed. One evening, Ethan told me he wanted to start a foundation. Not for publicity, not for praise, for structure, he said, to fund therapy programs that respected routine instead of forcing conformity. He designed it the same way he designed software: logical, sustainable, quietly effective. On the foundation's opening day, no ribbon was cut, no speeches were made. The doors simply opened, and families walked in. That was Ethan's idea. Noise doesn't help, he said. As I grew older, my body slowed. My hands ached in the mornings. Stairs took longer. Ethan noticed before I said anything. He adjusted his routines to match my pace. Systems adapt, he reminded me gently. One night, I asked him if he ever wondered what life would have been like with Rachel. He thought for a long time, Then he said, "She gave me life. You gave me a world." That was enough. I began writing everything down, not for fame, not for money, but so the truth would exist somewhere outside my memory. I wrote about the rocking, the humming, the yellow cup, the nights I thought I would fail him. Writing became my way of closing the circle. The media eventually moved on. Stories always do. But families kept writing letters. Children kept lining up colors. Teachers began asking different questions. How can we change the environment instead of the child? On my 70th birthday, Ethan surprised me with a small party. Only 5 people. Quiet music, soft light, everything planned around my comfort. "You taught me that love is structure," he said. I smiled. "You taught me that structure can be love," I replied. "I don't know how many years I have left. None of us do. But I know this. I was given a child when I thought my story was ending, and that child gave me a future I never imagined." Some people are born to be loud. Others are born to be precise. The world needs both. But most of all, it needs people willing to stay when leaving would be easier. Time has a way of softening even the sharpest memories. When I think back to the night Ethan first arrived at my door, I no longer feel panic. I feel gratitude. Not because it was easy, but because it mattered. Every choice after that moment shaped the man he became and the woman I learned to be. Ethan grew into a routine of his own design. He woke early, worked best before the city stirred, and walked the same quiet streets each morning. People in the neighborhood knew him as the calm young man who always nodded but rarely spoke. Children waved at him. He waved back precisely once every time. "Consistency builds trust," he once told me. The foundation expanded slowly, carefully. Therapists were trained to follow the child's pace instead of forcing progress. Schools asked for guidance. Some listened, some resisted. Change is uncomfortable. Ethan understood that too. He never argued emotionally. He presented evidence, patterns, results. Slowly, minds began to shift. One afternoon, a teacher invited Ethan to speak to a group of students who struggled like he once had. He sat among them instead of standing in front. He didn't tell them they could be anything they wanted. He told them they were already enough. That sentence stayed with them longer than any speech. I watched my grandson learn a different kind of social language. He learned how to say no without apology, how to leave rooms that overwhelmed him, how to explain his needs without shame. These skills were harder than coding, but he mastered them with the same care. As for me, I learned to let go. Not all at once, slowly. I stopped hovering. I stopped checking every detail. Trust goes both ways. He had trusted me to stay. Now it was my turn to trust him to stand. Rachel became a distant name, mentioned rarely. When she was mentioned, it no longer hurt. Absence becomes quieter over time. Ethan once asked if he should feel angry. I told him feelings don't follow rules. They come and go. What matters is what you build around them. One winter evening, the power went out during a storm. The house went dark and silent. Years earlier, that would have sent Ethan into panic. Instead, he lit candles and sat at the table, calm. "Backup systems exist for a reason," he said. I laughed. He always had a system. We talked that night, really talked, about fear, about choice, about how love is not proven by words but by presence. He told me he remembered the yellow cup from the first night. It was the first constant, he said, something that didn't disappear. As my reflection changed in the mirror, I felt no regret. I had lived a full life twice over, once as a teacher, once as a guardian to a child the world didn't know how to hold. Ethan's story continued to reach people in ways we never planned, quietly, through word of mouth, through small programs that worked, through children who stopped feeling broken. One day, Ethan asked if I was afraid of being forgotten. I thought about it before answering. "No," I said. "I'm afraid of leaving something unfinished." He nodded. "Then we'll finish it together," he said. I realized then that the story was never about success or money or even autism. It was about patience, about choosing to stay when leaving would have been easier, about building a life one quiet morning at a time. As the years passed, I began to understand something that had once frightened me. Ethan no longer needed me in the way he once had. He still wanted me, still chose me, but need and choice are very different things. That realization did not make me sad. It made me proud. Ethan's work became quieter but more powerful. He turned down large investors who wanted control and accepted smaller partnerships that respected his boundaries. People sometimes mistook his calm for weakness. They always regretted it. He listened carefully, spoke rarely, and decided precisely. Once a decision was made, he never wavered. I spent more time observing than doing. I sat in my chair by the window and watched the world move at a pace I no longer needed to follow. Ethan adjusted his schedule so he could walk with me in the evenings. We didn't talk much. We didn't need to. Silence between us was never empty. It was shared. One afternoon, Ethan brought me a printed report from the foundation. It showed numbers, progress, outcomes, children staying in mainstream classrooms longer, families reporting lower stress, therapists staying longer at their jobs, patterns improving. "This is working," he said. I nodded. I could have told him that without the data. I had seen it in the faces of parents who finally felt understood. That same week, a letter arrived from Rachel. Not legal, not demanding, just words. She wrote about regret, about fear, about how she hadn't known how to be a mother to a child who didn't fit the world she expected. I read it once and handed it to Ethan. He read it slowly. Then he folded it and placed it in a drawer. "Information stored," he said. "No action required." I understood him perfectly. My health began to fail quietly. Small things at first: fatigue, dizziness, forgetting words mid-sentence. Ethan noticed before any doctor did. He scheduled appointments. He adjusted lighting in the house. He labeled cabinets in clear print, not because I needed them yet, but because one day I might. "Preparation is kindness," he reminded me. One night, as I struggled to climb the stairs, Ethan offered his arm. I hesitated. I had always been the one supporting him. He looked at me gently. "Systems reverse when needed," he said. I took his arm. I began telling Ethan stories from my own childhood, about my parents, about teaching, about mistakes I made. He listened the way he always did, fully. One evening, he asked if I ever felt invisible before he came. I thought about it carefully. "Sometimes," I said, "especially when I stopped being useful." He nodded. "You were never invisible to me," he said. "You were my constant." That word again. Constant. The same thing he had given me without knowing it. As winter approached, I caught a cold that lingered longer than it should have. Ethan stayed nearby, working quietly, checking on me without hovering. He never panicked. He simply prepared. Medication schedules, emergency numbers, backup plans. Love, in his language, had always looked like this. One morning, I woke to find him asleep in the chair beside my bed, laptop closed, hands folded. For the first time, I allowed myself to imagine a future where I was not there. The thought no longer terrified me. I had done my part. I had stayed. Ethan woke and smiled faintly when he saw me watching. "You're still here," he said. I smiled back. "Yes," I said, "and so are you." I realized then that our story was nearing its quiet conclusion, not an ending, just a transition. The way seasons change without asking permission. Some lives are measured in achievements. Others are measured in moments when someone chose not to walk away. If my life were measured that way, it would be full beyond measure. The doctors called it age-related decline, a phrase so small for something that feels so large. They spoke calmly, carefully, as if tone could soften truth. I listened, nodded, asked the right questions. Ethan sat beside me, silent, absorbing everything. Later, at home, he wrote schedules on a whiteboard: medication times, rest periods, therapy exercises. He didn't look afraid. He looked focused. Fear, for him, had always been something to organize. I began to tire easily. Some days, even the walk to the kitchen felt long. Ethan adjusted without asking. He moved his work closer to home. Meetings became virtual. The world bent quietly around our needs, not because we demanded it, but because we designed it that way. We spent afternoons together in the living room. I read, he coded. The same hum of the refrigerator filled the space. The same light filtered through the curtains. It felt like coming full circle, back to the beginning, except now we understood each other completely. One afternoon, I asked him if he remembered his mother. He paused before answering. "I remember the absence more than the person," he said. "Absence teaches structure too." I reached for his hand. He let me. Letters continued to arrive at the foundation. Stories of children who had stopped hurting themselves, parents who finally slept through the night, teachers who learned to listen instead of correct. Ethan read every letter. He didn't respond to all of them. He didn't need to. Impact does not require acknowledgement. As my strength faded, my mind grew strangely clear. I saw my life not as a series of sacrifices, but as a long chain of choices, and the most important one had been made on a cold November afternoon when I opened my door and stayed. One evening, as the sun lowered slowly, I asked Ethan a question I had been carrying for years. "Do you think you would have been okay without me?" He thought for a long time. Then he answered honestly, "I would have survived, but I would not have understood myself. You taught me that difference is not danger." I closed my eyes and let that truth settle. The yellow cup sat on the table between us, worn now, scratched, faded. Ethan noticed me looking at it. "You can throw it away if you want," he said. I smiled. "No," I said, "it still works." That night, I dreamed of classrooms full of children who were no longer afraid to be quiet. I dreamed of systems that adapted instead of punished. I dreamed of a world that finally learned how to stay. When I woke, Ethan was beside me, just as he had been so many times before. He adjusted my pillow, checked my breathing, smiled gently. "You're okay," he said, and for once I believed him completely. I understood then that letting go was not the same as leaving. I had given Ethan everything I could. Now he was giving me peace. Some stories end with goodbyes. Ours was never about that. It was about continuity, about constance, about what happens when someone refuses to disappear. The morning light came softly through the curtains, the way it always had. I noticed details more clearly now, the way dust floated in the air, the rhythm of Ethan's breathing as he sat beside me. The world felt slower, gentler, as if it finally understood the pace I needed. I knew I was nearing the end before anyone said the words. My body spoke in small truths: longer rests, shorter walks, less hunger. Ethan never asked questions he already knew the answers to. He simply adjusted. He brought breakfast to my bed, eggs and toast, cut corner to corner. The yellow cup filled with water sat on the tray like it always had. Consistency, even now. We talked more in those final weeks, not about the future, but about meaning. Ethan asked what I wanted people to remember. I thought about it carefully. "Not my sacrifices," I said, "not my patience, just that I stayed. That's enough." He nodded, as if he had been waiting for that answer all along. One afternoon, I asked him to read to me. He chose a simple book, nothing dramatic, nothing loud. His voice was steady, precise, every word placed exactly where it belonged. I listened and smiled, realizing that the child who once hummed through sleepless nights had learned to speak peace into the room. Rachel sent one final message. I didn't read it. Ethan did. He didn't summarize it. He didn't analyze it. He simply said, "She's still searching." I reached for his hand. "That's her journey," I whispered, "not yours." He squeezed my fingers once in understanding. On my last strong day, Ethan helped me to the living room. I sat in my chair by the window, the same chair where I had watched him line up cars, write symbols, build worlds no one else could see yet. He stood in front of me, unsure for the first time in years. I smiled at him. "You're ready," I said. He shook his head slightly. "Ready doesn't mean alone," he replied. I laughed softly. "No, it doesn't." That night, the house was quiet. No fear, no panic, just calm. Ethan sat beside my bed, holding my hand, his thumb moving in a small, steady pattern against my skin. "Systems stabilize when input fades," he whispered, mostly to himself. I closed my eyes, comforted by the familiar logic of his love. I don't know the exact moment I left. I only know that I wasn't afraid. I had lived long enough to see the impossible become ordinary, to see a child the world rejected become someone the world needed, to know that love, when practiced daily and without conditions, becomes unbreakable. If you are listening to my story now, I want you to understand something important. Success does not always look like applause. Sometimes it looks like staying up all night listening to a child hum. Sometimes it looks like toast cut the same way every morning. Sometimes it looks like believing in someone before they believe in themselves. Ethan will continue. He will build. He will protect others the way he was protected. He will create systems that leave room for gentleness. And when people ask him where he learned that kind of strength, he will not say my name loudly. He will show it quietly, in the way he stays. My name is Vivian Cooper. I was a teacher. I was a grandmother. I was a constant. And that was enough. If you are watching this and wondering whether it's too late to matter, too late to begin, too late to stay, let my life answer you. It is not.